Language is one of the greatest treasures a people can hold, yet it is often the treasure most easily overlooked. It is more than words, it is more than sound, it is more than communication. Language is memory woven into syllables, identity wrapped in rhythm, and history preserved in tone. For Black people across the world, language has never been simply a tool. It has been a shield, a compass, a record, and a bridge. It is a living code, one shaped by melanin-rich cultures that carried their knowledge, their stories, their emotions, and their identity through spoken tradition long before books existed. And today, as we reflect on this code of melanin speech, we are reminded that the survival of a people is often hidden in the survival of their words. Every civilization has left behind ruins of stone, artifacts of metal, and pages of ink. But African civilizations left behind something far more powerful. A spoken memory that traveled through generations, crossing deserts, rivers, storms, kingdoms, and oceans. Their language preserved more than facts. It preserved feeling. It preserved identity. It preserved the truth of who they were, what they valued, and what they refused to forget. When an elder spoke, the past stood beside them. When a child listened, the future opened in front of them. Through language, they built continuity in a world that constantly tried to reshape them. There is something extraordinary about the way African languages move. They do not travel in straight lines. They dance, they ripple, they bend and rise like waves. They carry tone like a drumbeat and emotion like a heart. They hold expressions that reveal not just what happened but how it felt. They allow a single sentence to carry the weight of an entire experience. This is because African languages were shaped by environments where memory had to be portable, durable, and trustworthy. People could lose land, lose possessions, lose kingdoms, but they refused to lose their stories. They refused to lose their identity. And so they encoded everything into speech, into rhythm, rhyme, repetition, and tone, so that nothing essential could be erased. When people speak of melanin, they often speak of skin. But melanin is not limited to appearance. It is also a symbol of depth, richness, and resilience. And just like melanin protects the body, language protects the culture. The speech of African people has always been a protective layer. It guarded their self-worth when the world tried to diminish them. It guarded their history when outsiders tried to rewrite it. It guarded their identity when others tried to dilute it. Melanin speech has always served as an anchor in times of movement, a light in times of darkness, and a map in times of confusion. Think about the Griots of West Africa, those living libraries who carried centuries of memory within their voices. They spoke the rise and fall of empires, the origins of families, the laws of the land, the victories of ancestors, and the wisdom of generations. They were walking archives containing more knowledge than anyone could write on paper. And because their speech was alive, it could adapt, expand, and evolve without losing its essence. This is the beauty of Black language. It is not static. It moves like water, adjusting to every environment while maintaining its soul. This same adaptability is what allowed African languages to survive even when African people were uprooted. When millions were taken from their homelands and scattered across continents, their languages did not disappear, they transformed. They mixed with new tongues, blended with new rhythms, and created new forms of expression that still carried memory within them. This is how spirituals were born. This is how patois emerged. This is how Creole formed. This is how African American vernacular English developed. These languages were not evidence of loss, they were evidence of survival. They were proof that even when everything else was taken, people still held on to their voice. And when you pay attention to the way Black people speak today in Africa, in the Caribbean, in the Americas, you will notice something remarkable. You will notice that every expression, every gesture, every tone, every phrase still carries an echo of the ancestors. It is in the way a mother comforts her child. It is in the way friends share laughter that feels like music. It is in the way a storyteller changes their voice to make a tale come alive. It is in the way communities speak with warmth, creativity, and authenticity. It is in the way a simple phrase can carry layers of meaning that reveal history, resilience, and cultural pride. Language for Black people has always been a form of resistance. When the world attempted to silence them, they created new ways to speak. When they were forbidden to read, they sharpened their memory. When they were mocked for their accent, they turned it into music. When they were told to hide their culture, they encoded it in proverbs, metaphors, and rhythms. Every adaptation was a declaration. You may affect my circumstances, but you will not erase my identity. That declaration still lives in the speech of Black people everywhere today. Speech is powerful not because of the words alone, but because of the intention behind them. African languages taught people to speak with purpose. Every word mattered. Elders spoke with meaning because they understood they were passing a torch. They understood that once wisdom leaves your mouth, it becomes part of the world. And so they spoke carefully, they spoke with responsibility, they spoke with pride. Today, many of those traditions remain. When a community gathers, when stories are shared, when advice is given, the tone shifts, the air changes. Something ancient wakes up in the room. Because speech in the Melanin tradition is sacred, not because of religion, but because of memory. It is through language that people understand who they are. It is through language that they connect with their ancestors. It is through language that they see themselves clearly. Many Black children grow up hearing words and phrases that feel familiar even if they do not fully understand them. They hear expressions passed down from parents and grandparents that carry cultural memory inside them. Those phrases are seeds planted in the mind. Seeds that eventually bloom into identity. This is why losing language is dangerous, because when you lose your language, you lose your reflection. But the beauty of the Black experience is that even when language was threatened, it rebuilt its. Even when forced into new lands, new rules, and new systems, Black people found ways to mold speech into something uniquely theirs. They created slang that carried cultural truth. They created code switching as a survival tool. They created poetry that exposed hidden pain and secret strength. They created music where every word became a pulse. They created oral traditions where children learned who they were long before they could read or write. This is why Black speech is so recognizable. It carries the weight of history and the fire of creativity. The code of Melanin speech is not written in ink. It is written in experience. It is shaped by joys and sorrows, victories and losses, migrations and reunions. It is shaped by community, by rhythm, by struggle, and by pride. It is shaped by people who learn to turn survival into artistry. When a Black person speaks, they are not just forming sentences. They are continuing a tradition that stretches back thousands of years. They are carrying memory. They are carrying identity. They are carrying culture that refuses to fade. Today, as we reflect on the significance of this code, one message becomes clear. Your voice matters. Your words matter. Your expression matters. You are part of a legacy that used speech to endure, to rise, and to transform. You may not be a griot, a poet, or a linguist, but your speech still holds power. The way you talk about yourself shapes your confidence. The way you talk about your dreams shapes your future. The way you talk to others shapes their understanding of themselves. When you speak with intention, you become part of the ongoing story of a people who always knew the value of language. Your voice is an inheritance. Use it well. Speak with pride. Speak with clarity. Speak with courage. Speak with authenticity. Remember that every time you express yourself, you represent generations who fought to keep their voice alive. You carry the rhythm of your ancestors, the resilience of your lineage, and the creativity of your culture. The code of Melanin speech is alive in you. Let it guide you. Let it strengthen you. Let it remind you that you belong to a people whose identity could never be erased, because their voice could never be silenced. The languages of Black civilizations were never just tools for communication. They were living archives that carried the memory of ancestors, the structure of communities, and the rhythm of identity. Every syllable, every inflection, every proverb held layers of wisdom that traveled through generations without needing books. These languages protected culture, shaped values, and taught people how to walk with dignity long before modern education existed. When a child was born into these societies, they didn't just learn how to speak. They inherited a worldview, a philosophy, and a code of conduct woven into their mother tongue. Each word was like a thread in a tapestry, connecting the present to centuries of memory that could not be erased by time or distance. The power of these languages rested not only in what they said, but in how they were spoken. Tone, rhythm, and melody mattered just as much as grammar. A single proverb could teach responsibility, humility, courage, or patience. A short phrase could reflect an entire history of migration, conflict, survival, and triumph. Through language, the lessons of ancestors remained alive, guiding people through hardship and reminding them of who they were, even when the world tried to make them forget. Black languages held psychological strength because they gave people a sense of belonging. Speaking your mother tongue meant knowing your place in the universe. It meant understanding how your community thought, how your elders reasoned, and how your people defined truth. This is why colonial powers often feared African languages. They understood that as long as a people held on to their language, they held on to their identity, they held on to their confidence, they held on to their unity. For centuries, attempts were made to erase or weaken Black languages, because language is the root of self-definition. But even under pressure, these languages survived through whispers in the night, lullabies sung to children, stories told around fires, and secret conversations carried across sea. They lived in coded songs that enslaved people used to escape. They lived in the prayers, chants, rhythms, and names that carried ancestral meaning, even when spoken in new lands. A people whose language refuses to die can never truly be conquered. Within Black languages, memory traveled in more than words. It traveled in pauses, symbols, metaphors, and the ability to speak without speaking. Many African cultures developed ways of communicating that went beyond literal meaning. A glance could deliver instruction. A proverb could offer a warning or a blessing. A praise name could reveal a person's moral character or destiny. Even silence had value. It was a form of communication that taught reflection and discipline. To understand these languages, you had to listen not just with your ears but with your mind and your spirit. This kind of communication taught emotional intelligence long before modern psychology existed. It trained people to pay attention, to respect context, and to read meaning beneath the surface. It shaped individuals who were not only articulate but thoughtful, observant, and attuned to human behavior. Language also shaped leadership. In many African societies, the most respected leaders were not those with the most wealth or status, but those who could speak with wisdom, clarity, and integrity. A person who mastered the art of language mastered the art of influence. Elders taught that words could build or destroy, heal or wound, unite or divide. Because of this, language came with responsibility. Children learned early that speaking without thinking was a sign of immaturity. Words had weight. Words were remembered. Words carried consequence. This created generations of people who understood the value of disciplined speech, who knew how to communicate strategically, who could negotiate, counsel, and inspire simply through the way they used language. Black languages also carried identity through name. A name was never a random label. It was a story, a prophecy, a reminder, or a declaration. Names connected individuals to their community, their ancestors, and their destiny. In many cultures, a child received multiple names throughout life, each marking a stage of growth, achievement, or transformation. Through this tradition, language became a tool for shaping identity and encouraging people to live with purpose. A name could motivate someone to become brave, wise, resilient, or compassionate. It could serve as a compass, pointing a person toward the kind of life they were expected to lead. Even more powerful was the way Black languages adapted without losing their essence. When forced into new lands during the transatlantic slave trade, African people blended their languages with the tongues of their captors, creating new languages filled with old meanings. Creole, Pidgin, Gullah, and countless dialects emerged as linguistic survival strategy. They allowed people to communicate and organize in dangerous environments, while still maintaining a sense of identity. These new languages carried hidden messages, cultural memories, and spiritual truths, disguised in everyday speech. They proved that even in the harshest circumstances, language can evolve without surrendering its soul. Today, when people talk about preserving African languages, they are talking about preserving identity, memory, and the psychological freedom of future generations. A language is a mirror that shows a people who they are and where they come from. When that mirror is broken, self-understanding becomes fractured. However, when that mirror is protected, polished, and passed on, generations walk with confidence because they know they stand on a foundation built long before they arrived. Every proverb memorized, every ancestral name spoken, Every story told is an act of cultural preservation. It is a declaration that this identity will not disappear. It is a promise that the voices of ancestors will continue to guide the path forward. Black languages are more than communication. They are architecture. They build minds. They build values. They build unity. They build dignity. They shape how people see the world and how they see themselves. They carry the memories of thousands of years, preserved not in books, but in the mouths and hearts of those who speak them. And as long as these languages continue to be spoken, no force on earth can erase the identity they protect. Melanin speech was more than sound. It was a code of survival that allowed African people to hold on to themselves, even in times of displacement and disruption. Through songs, chants, naming traditions, tonal patterns, and storytelling, identity was preserved when everything else was threatened. The language became a shield, a reminder of origin, a quiet declaration that no matter what was taken, the essence of the people could not be erased. This code of survival wasn't accidental, it was intentionally woven into every form of communication. When a community is stripped of land, freedom, and stability, the one thing they fight hardest to keep is their sense of self. And for African people across centuries, language became the vessel in which that self was protected. It carried memory across oceans. It carried dignity across generations. It carried truth in moments where silence was forced and voices were punished for simply existing. Even in the harshest moments of history, when families were torn apart and cultures are pushed to the edge, African languages held fragments of identity that no oppressor could fully decode. Singing became a way to communicate emotion when speaking openly was forbidden. Chants became a way to unify the spirit when gatherings were restricted. Naming traditions preserved ancestral inheritance even when written records were banned. Rhythm and tone allowed people to send messages that outsiders couldn't interpret. Every syllable, every hum, every vibration of the voice became a strategy for survival. These were not just linguistic choices, they were acts of resistance, acts of remembrance, acts of quiet defiance. When the world attempted to strip away identity, Melanin speech rebuilt it from the inside out. There is something profoundly powerful about a people using their voice as both weapon and medicine. Melanin speech encoded stories that kept hope alive. Grandmothers whispered wisdom into the ears of children, teaching them where they came from and who they were meant to become, even when the environment offered nothing but pain. Men and women turned everyday conversations into lessons wrapped in metaphors, ensuring that culture survived without needing pen or paper. The cadence of African speech, its rise, fall, melody, and pulse became the heartbeat of communities that refused to let themselves disappear. Even when forced into new lands, surrounded by unfamiliar languages and unfamiliar rules, African people reshaped their speech to carry old memories into new worlds. Creole languages, pidgins, African-infused dialects, and new forms of expression emerged not as signs of loss but as signs of resilience. They were proof that identity does not die when pressured. It adapts, transforms, and strengthens. Melanin speech also carried emotional memory. It held the laughter of ancestors, the rhythm of ceremonies, the calls of hunters, the lullabies of mothers, the proverbs of elders. It preserved the distinct sound of belonging. When African people were separated, the familiar sound of tone, accent, rhythm, or linguistic pattern brought instant comfort. Hearing someone speak in a way that resembled home allowed strangers to become family. Language built bridges that laws could not break. Even in times of trauma, people found healing through the sound of their own stories being spoken back to them. The voice became a sanctuary where individuals could reconnect with their roots even when their environment tried to disconnect them from everything they knew. The beauty of Melanin speech is that it carried not only memory but identity shaped in real time. It allowed communities to define themselves rather than letting others decide who they were. The power of naming is the power of existence. The power of storytelling is the power of shaping reality. The power of communication is the power of controlling your narrative. African languages gave people the authority to say, we are still here, we know who we are, we remember where we come from, and that declaration echoed across generations, long after the original speakers were gone. Their words outlived them. Their voices created an unbroken chain that reached into the future, touching every person who carries African ancestry today. When people speak of the resilience of African civilizations, they often focus on physical achievements, architecture, kingdoms, invention. But the greatest achievement of all was the preservation of identity through language. When the world attempted to reduce African people to silence, the voice became stronger. When the world demanded assimilation, the voice adapted without letting go of the past. When the world tried to rewrite history, the voice kept the truth alive through oral tradition, and because of that, African identity was never lost. It simply moved through speech, waiting to be reclaimed, remembered, or rediscovered by those who would come later. The code of melanin speech continues to operate today. It lives in the way people laugh, the way they greet one another, the slang they create, the metaphors they use, the music they make, and the rhythm that naturally flows through their communication. It lives in the way African people around the world form instant connection through shared linguistic patterns, even when they come from different countries. It lives in the pride people feel when they hear ancestral languages being revived, taught, and spoken again. It lives in the voices of poets, educators, musicians, and storytellers who continue to use language as a tool of empowerment and cultural restoration. This keynote reminds us that speech is not just communication, it is inheritance. Every sound carries history. Every rhythm carries memory. Every tone carries identity. Melanin speech is living proof that even when everything else is taken, the voice can rebuild what was lost. It teaches us that language is more than words. It is power. It is culture. It is survival. It is legacy. And for African people, it has always been the unbreakable thread that ties the past to the present and prepares the future for those yet to come. To understand Black languages is to understand the soul behind them, because these languages are more than words or sounds. They are living archives of everything a people have survived, learned, created, and passed down. They reveal a worldview shaped by community, by the idea that no person stands alone and no story belongs to just one voice. They carry the rhythm of shared struggles, the celebration of victories, and the quiet strength of generations who refused to disappear even when the world tried to silence them. In every word there is memory. In every expression there is identity. In every tone there is history. When you listen carefully, you begin to realize that these languages are woven with meaning that cannot be separated from the people who speak them. They are built on balance, where communication is not simply about information but about connection, healing, and understanding. They show a profound respect for life, for elders, for ancestors, for land, for wisdom, for the unseen forces that shape human existence. When a Black language is spoken, it does not only communicate an idea, it communicates a way of seeing the world that is deeply rooted in centuries of consciousness. What makes these languages extraordinary is the way they preserve knowledge without needing books, libraries, or written archives. The memory lives in the mouths of the people, in the songs they sing, in the proverbs they pass down, in the stories that travel from one generation to the next. A single phrase can carry the weight of 1,000 years. A proverb can deliver lessons that no textbook could capture. A traditional greeting can reveal an entire philosophy of unity, humility, and human worth. The language becomes a vessel for identity, shaping how people interpret their place in the world and how they relate to one another. And this is not accidental, it is intentional. For centuries, communities invested deeply in the power of speech, understanding that words anchor memory and memory anchors identity. Without language, a people can forget who they are. With language, they can remember even what history tried to erase. When colonial forces tried to divide African communities or force new languages onto them, they were not simply changing communication patterns, they were attempting to break identity. But Black languages endured because they contained more than vocabulary. They carried emotion, rhythm, culture, ancestral knowledge, and a spiritual awareness of life's interconnectedness. They carried truth, and truth is hard to destroy. Even when people were scattered, displaced, or silenced, the essence of their languages found a way to survive. It survived in coded speech, in hidden songs, in subtle pronunciations, in the way words were bent to create new expressions that carried the old spirit. It survived in the whispers of elders who refused to let their children grow up without knowing where they came from. It survived because identity does not die as long as the language that shaped it is still spoken, remembered, or felt. Language is one of the greatest tools for reclaiming identity. When you speak the words of your ancestors, something inside you aligns. You become connected to their endurance, their brilliance, their imagination. You inherit not just grammar and syntax, but resilience, pride, and belonging. You begin to understand that identity is not just inherited, it is spoken into existence every single day. It grows with the stories you repeat, the names you honor, the lessons you share. It strengthens when you teach a younger generation a word they've never heard before, or when you embrace an expression that carries the tone of a world your ancestors once walked. This is why melanin speech matters. It is not just sound, it is survival. Black languages remind us that the voice of a people is their power. When people lose their voice, they lose their shape in history. But when people protect their voice, nothing can erase them. Language becomes a shield, a banner, a home, a reminder that even when everything else is taken away, identity can be rebuilt through speech. It becomes a compass that guides you back to who you truly are. It becomes a mirror that shows you the strength embedded in your spirit. As long as a language survives, the people survive, even if the world refuses to acknowledge their worth. Every spoken word becomes an act of defiance, an act of remembrance, and an act of creation. In today's world, where globalization often pushes people toward sameness, Black languages stand as proof that diversity is not a threat, it is a treasure. They teach us that identity thrives when people embrace their roots, not when they abandon them. They show that the deepest form of connection comes from understanding where you come from, what your people valued, and how your ancestors expressed themselves. These languages invite you to carry your history proudly, not quietly. They push you to honor your story by speaking it boldly, confidently, and intentionally. They remind you that your voice matters because the generations before you fought to keep it alive. When you learn the meaning behind Black languages, you learn the meaning behind a people's heartbeat. You discover that every sound carries a message, every message carries a memory, and every memory carries the blueprint of who that people has always been. And when you choose to honor that blueprint, when you choose to value the language, protect the stories, preserve the meanings, you participate in keeping identity alive for the future. Language is legacy. Language is continuity. Language is power. And melanin speech stands as one of the greatest testaments to human determination, creativity, and the unstoppable desire to remain rooted in truth. As long as that voice continues to echo through the world, the identity it carries will never fade, never weaken, never die.